Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Retropower Uncut. It's my first one of 2021, so hope everybody out there is doing okay in these rather strange times. But anyway, we'll crack on and have a little look at what we've been doing. It's been an extremely busy week on lots of little jobs, so I'm bound to forget something. But I'm going to try and remember everything we've done. I'll start with Utah. I'm conveniently standing next to. We've been getting through a few jobs on that. Bremax have been in this morning, sorting out the wiring loom. They've been doing all the measurements and working out all the locations, and Cal's gone through that with them. They've been in sorting all that out. They're going to go away, get the loom made for this now. So that's moving forward. They've been positioning the ECUs and PDUs and all that sort of thing, and various connections to the heater controls and that side of things. And leading on, that then leads me on to Adam has been working on the heater unit. We buy the units in from Vintage Air, but we modify them. They come with a sort of universal loom attached. And Adam's been revising that, shortening the loom, changing it. They come with relays. The relays have been removed so that we can use the PDU to control the unit directly rather than using the relays that are built in. So we use the Vintage Air switches, but we use them to input to the PDU, and then we use the PDU to control the heater unit. So he's been doing that, making a sub loom and then terminating that and then testing it on the bench and making sure that all works. And also hand in hand with that, James has been drawing up some parts for the vent outlets for the heater box in that. I've got one kicking around here. He's been drawing these adapters up, which we draw in CAD and then 3D print. And it gives us the ability to make some fairly convoluted shaped adapters to go onto the heater box, because there's not a lot of space under the dash. And we'd already done a couple of them, but we've had to revise one of them and do one other one. So he's been on busily sorting those out, and they're now sort of loosely put on the heater box. He's also been working on CAD model for the centre console. He's done a quick cardboard mock-up, and we've all sort of, Cal mainly has been having a look at working out what looks right and what positions we need all the various items in. He's come to a conclusion on that. He's then drawn the first stab at that, CNC plasma cut it in mild steel, roughly bent it, tried it in the car, refined a few ideas, drawn it again, done another rough cut blank, which is now pretty close to where we're going to end up being. That'll finally be done in aluminium. We'll do an outline cut for the outer perimeter of the part on the plasma in aluminium, and then that'll be CNC machined so that we can have all the chamfers on the recesses in it, and then that'll mount into the car, and then a variety of the various things that are mounted into the centre console will then all be mounted into that. And then that'll then once it's all trial fitted and make sure everything's good on it and we're happy with all the finish and the fit, then it'll be stripped down, prepped, painted, and then hydro dipped in a wood grain effect. That also ties into another task that we've just been finishing off, that Gaz has just been finishing off this week, which is finishing off the wood trim, all the various wood trim that goes around in the car, because we knew we'd be adding extra things like the centre console I've just been talking about. We decided that rather than re-veneering all the old wood, which was not good enough to reuse as it was, we were going to hydro dip that so that it also then matches the new parts like the centre console that we're planning on doing in metal. So all of the wood parts have all been re-prepped. It's been quite painstaking because there's quite a lot of residue of previous coatings on them and defects in them and that sort of stuff. So we've been going through all of those, building them up, sanding them back a couple of times. Actually, it's taken a couple of coats through to do that, and then finally, once we're happy with the surface, epoxy prime them and then flat that back so that that's ready for a final paint, and then they'll be going as well to the hydro dippers along with the centre console and a variety of other interior parts, all of which need to be hydro dipped. In the meantime, also on Utah, Trev's been busy doing brake lines. He's been routing those, working out the routings for those. There's a few fiddly areas which have been causing a few little headaches we're using hardline on this, and he's been working out ways of bending the hardline to the correct radii for various awkward to get at areas. And that's been his task of the day so far today, which has been throwing up a few challenges, but we're making progress. Some of the best laid plans don't necessarily go exactly, and in a couple of places we're having to change the fittings we were using and change our plan on how we're terminating the ends of those lines, just because when the reality came, what looked like a doable bend on the brake line actually isn't achievable. So we've had to just revise in a couple of places how we're terminating those lines, but that's dealt with anyway, and Trev's piling on with that. I think that pretty much covers everything that we've done on Utah. I think I'm bound to miss something because there's quite a lot of things been going on. Ah, yes, Jamie's just gesticulated to me that I'm forgetting trim. Above me, Dean upstairs, as Dean's been working on the seats. Yeah, he's been making the first stages on the seats. We've bought seat foams for the rear seat, which are now upstairs with Dean, and the front seats he's stripped down and he's on with. I know he patterned quite a while ago, so he's on with doing the front seat trim at the moment. So yeah, that's also progressing. As I kind of lost touch there a bit because I haven't actually been up to see Dean for a couple of days, so I'd kind of forgotten about that. But yeah, Dean's marching on with that as well. So yeah, we're kind of progressing on all fronts with this car. So yeah, things are coming together quite well. Moving on, Trev's also been working on the Stratos with various jobs on that. So there's been a little bit of bitting and bobbing for various reasons on that, but the key things are that the drive shafts that we got back a little while before Christmas are now fitted. Happy with that. The lengths are all bang on, so that's good. Did measuring well. The drive shafts are all in. Happy with the way with the fit. A little issue with the hub bolts, but they're sorted out now. So that's all together. The steering column shroud, there's been a revision to the design on that, and we have, or I don't know if we have 3D printed or we are about to 3D print. We haven't done it yet. We're 3D printing the column shroud with a couple of tweaks in and an alteration done for there's a mount which Adam's been drawing up, a billet mount which is going to mount the screen, the dash screen, which is mounted off the top of the steering column. The column shroud has then got a hole in to clear that mount. So that's been progressing as well. And Adam's drawn the mounting up. I think that's currently being sent away to Alitech, I believe, to see whether they can machine it, because it's going to be fairly challenging to machine. That's the other thing. That's the thing I'd missed on Utah. The air intake grills. Adam had been working on drawing up the air intake grills, which go either side of the central grill. We're having those. We're making those in brass and chroming them. The exact means that we're making them by, we're not 100% sure yet. We're kind of we're weighing up, and it's going to come down a little bit to cost and a little bit to polishability, whether we have those done as a 3D printed lost wax casting and have them cast in brass, or whether we do them as a CNC billet piece of brass. In either case, it needs to be chromed afterwards, and there's pros and cons to both processes in terms of how easy they are to chrome and how much polishing they require. But there's a plan afoot there to make those grills in brass and have them chromed via one means or another. But Adam's drawn those up, and he just finished drawing those and done a 3D print of them, which he was testing yesterday, I believe. No, day before. So he's made good progress on that. Worked out how to mount them, which is quite tricky because there's not a lot of land on the body to actually put the fixings into, but he's sorted that out. So yeah, so that's going well. Moving on, I've been doing some work on Gordon's car with a power steering conversion on that. When Gordon first had the car, the conclusion was that the original spec didn't include power steering. We all knew, Gordon included, that it was going to be a little bit marginal. The call that was made originally was we won't go with it. Having used it on and off for a year, the conclusion is actually, yeah, it could do with it. So I've been working on a conversion that doesn't involve modifying anything on the body, and still retaining some collapsibility elements in the column, whilst making it so it can all bolt into the original mountings that the original column bolted into. So I'll pick up on that in a minute next door when we go through, because it's on the bench in there. And the other thing while we're in here, nestling next to me, is the LSA engine destined for the Jensen C-V8. The ancillary drive kit on the front is now all on. Rather nice drive kit that's all now installed. James has installed that. So that's now basically ready for the mock-up build stage of the Jensen project. We're not quite ready for it yet, hence why it's still sat in here, but that is now ready for the mock-up build stage of the Jensen project. So I guess that's a good point as any to move on and wander through next door, and we'll have a look where we're at in there. As I walk through, that's the steering column, which I've just finished doing. That's now ready for clean up and paint. That's, say, a column that's done to use the NSK steering motor, which is commonly found. This particular application is from a Corsa B, Vauxhall Corsa B, just because the mounts, the gearbox, the bolt pattern and the bolted mounts on the gearbox casing on it are a little bit easier to fit than they are on most of the other applications for these NSK steering motors. So that's why we tend to use the Corsa B one, although there's less of them around to buy now. But so that's the case with that. But we retained a collapsibility element at the bottom and a sliding element at the top. So there's still some. It's not as long as it was, but there is still a collapsible element in the column, which I'm keen to try and keep. But it still keeps the original switchgear. It still fits to the original mounts on the car, which were built with the idea that should they need to be, they would take the reaction force from the steering motor should we ever need it, even though originally the plan wasn't to need it. So yeah, we're ready for some paint on that. But moving on around the corner, Stu's been busy on the Morris. The front end, which you saw started last time, Stu had started the near side wing. He'd done the majority of the work on the near side wing last week, and he'd probably done 80% of the front panel last week as well. He's now finished the front panel, finished the shaping of the near side wing. He hasn't actually finished the near side wing, I'll come on to that in a minute. And he's now started he's probably done 80% now of the work on the offside front wing, as you can see. That's the next step really on that. He's pretty close to the stage. He was doing a bit of reshaping down here this morning, and there's various bits of shaping still needed, and there's bits of work required. But basically one of the next tasks is then going to be grafting the new section onto the original wing. That gives it a bit more rigidity to work with, and then it'll be then titivating the fit and adjusting the fit elsewhere. And then that's where there's quite a long slog of work on both of these wings, which is tapping and filing. Basically, hammer and dolly over the entire wing, levelling up high and low spots and getting a smooth finish, and then basically filing the wing to get a level finish all over. So the tapping and filing process on all of those front sections will take quite a while. There's quite a bit of work in that. But what we're going to do is, once they're at the grafted on correct shape stage, then Stu's going to move on to the rear wings at that point and set to working on the rear wings, so he can get them to this sort of stage, and then he'll move back onto the front. Gives him a bit of a break, because once you've stared at the same panels for quite a long time, you start to go colourblind. You know, you get the sort of white blindness, and you can't see your way through really. So he's going to move on to the back, do the shaping on the rear wings, then he'll move back to the front of the car, do the tapping and filing on the front, and then he'll move back to the back again and do the tapping and filing on the back. That's the plan as it stands anyway. So yeah, very pleased with progress on that. It's really coming together. The shape, the initial shape was as sort of determined in the foam and filler. Looks really good in steel on the car. So we thought it would, but you never quite know until it's in the steel, and we're happy with that now. It's interesting as an aside to that. Kind of tying into Utah really on the Jaguar front, is that it was fairly well known at the time that Sir William Lyons, when he directly controlled Jaguar, would only approve car designs in steel. A lot of car manufacturers kind of in that period did design approval at a clay stage or in the earlier design stages. At Jaguar, they often didn't, I believe anyway, didn't use clay modelling early on in the process. They basically did the drawings, and they did lit drawings and drawings with the shadow and the light lines in and the shadow lines in to get an initial idea, and then they moved on and and from that they made a book and did a steel body for design approval. They kind of jumped all the full-scale clay stage and went straight to a steel design, in that they knew that William Lyons wouldn't approve the design unless it was in steel. So it's an interesting tie-in there, that actually it's not a new thing doing an initial design in steel. It's just that it's a bit easier if you work from a book. On this, we've worked from foam on one side, and then Stu's profile from the far side mirrored all the profiles to get the shape this side, which is quite difficult. It's quite challenging, and yeah, I think he's nearly had enough of that front wing now. So he'll be glad to get to the stage he's at, because it is quite brain taxing doing that mirroring of each profile and working out where your errors are from one side compared to the other. So at that point, you kind of wish you had a book, but the hours spent on the book still don't offset the time saving of doing the mirroring. So it's horses for courses, but it's all coming together now. It's coming together very well. Moving on this way, we will skip to the Chevette. Scott's taken the Chevette off the jig, which is convenient and good, because the Jensen, which I'll come to in a sec, has got to go on the jig. He's moved that up onto the ramp. We're doing a process where we're going to go from the jig to the ramp, and then from the ramp to the rotisserie. So the rotisserie will go back in the space we've just been standing in next to the Morris, probably next week, I think. But he's gone on the ramp temporarily, because while we're on the jig, we put the mock-up empty engine block and head in the body, along with the Quaife 60G gearbox. We put all that in on there, and we also put the axle in, albeit a little clumsily, at the back on the jig to sort out the mount. But the mount that it's impossible to fit at that stage is the gearbox mount, because it goes underneath the car on top of the jig. There's no physical room to work. So the solution, you can't do the gearbox mount with the car on the jig. So we've basically strapped the gearbox in place, moved the body shell from the jig to the ramp on a trolley. Now we've got it in the air, we can fabricate the gearbox cross member and the gearbox cross member mount. Scott's done the mounts, he's doing the cross member at the moment. So that's all now possible now the car's on the ramp. He's also loosely hung the rear axle in place, so that we can just finalise the panhard rod mounting on the axle, and just double check where everything's at while the car's not on the rotisserie, because all the mechanical heavy items have to come out when the car's on the rotisserie. So we need to make sure that we finalised all the mountings for everything heavy, so that those items can come out. Then the car will go onto the rotisserie next week, and we can finalise tidying up. Scott's done a lot of the rough tidying underneath, trimming back the edges of the link boxes, trimming back the edges of the tunnel, doing all the rough trimming work underneath the car. But next week, once it's on the rotisserie, then you can do the final trimming of all that with the car the right way up, when you're not getting all the grinding grit raining down your neck, and it's not a pleasant job to do from underneath. So he'll carry on with that on the rotisserie, and we can then also do all the seam brazing. We TIG braze all the seams on the car using a silicon bronze TIG brazing rod. So we'll go around and we'll TIG braze all the seams on the car at that stage, finish off any bits of welding that we wanted to do with the car the other way up. For example, the steering column mounting was a tricky weld to do with the car the right way up, because it's all upside down. So we're going to do that on the rotisserie, where we can do it in position rather than out of position, because they're fairly critical welds, so it's nicer to do them the right way up. And then we can proceed. We've got a bit of panel beating to do on the quarter panel, just to get that shape correct. The car had some previous accident damage, so we're going to do a bit of panel beating there just to get the quarter the right shape before we start thinking about body kit fit, which is the sort of next stage after that. And so that pretty much ties up where things are at on the Chevette. Then moving on, we have the Jensen. The body is, I hasten to add, the body is just thrown on. That literally got chucked on this morning just to get it out of the way, because we needed a bit of a move around in here, because we needed to get into our box storage to get at a box that was way back in the storage. So the body was just loosely thrown on this morning. That's not even remotely in position. But yeah, we collected the rebuilt chassis from Ron Clay. We collected that on Tuesday. It's now Thursday. Yeah, we collected that on Tuesday. We're pleased with that. Got that back. That's had the modifications required that we needed, because we will be running Interceptor front suspension and an Interceptor based, albeit not Interceptor components, brake system on the front of this car. The next stage that I'll be working on next week will be, I'll be fitting this chassis onto the jig, probably on sill clamps, so that I can keep maximum space underneath the chassis for laying things around. I need to get it fairly high, because the first job will be doing the preliminary work to fit the Jaguar independent rear end into this chassis. It won't be a direct fit. We're not quite sure what we're going to have to modify yet. We want to try and keep the complete Jaguar rear end as a unit. They work very well as a unit, and there's a lot of actually quite clever engineering done by Jaguar when they invented that setup. And if you take some of it away, it actually does. It doesn't really work very well as a setup. If you remove any one part of it, you really have to re-engineer the whole lot. It works as a unit very well, but if you start messing with it, you end up having to change the whole lot. So we're going to try and use it as a full unit if we possibly can, which we think we can. So that'll be the first job. We'll be fitting that into the back of that, and then also while it's on the jig, then we can bring the engine through that you saw next door, and we'll do the preliminary work on working out whether that's going to fit, which initial measurements show yes it should do, with the right exhaust manifold selection, which isn't the ones that are on it. That shouldn't be too problematic, but we'll begin to find out on that one next week. So yeah, watch this space. Moving on, we walk past the independent rear end that will another point I'd forgotten about, actually. Also, in the things that have turned up this week to do with the Jensen, we've had the arrival of the differential, the limited slip diff that's going into that rear end, and the crown wheel and pinion. There's a big crown wheel and pinions are a minefield. A lot of the aftermarket crown wheel and pinions for multiple axles are not very good at all. There's a lot of rubbish on the market, and it's a subject that's close to our hearts at the moment, because we've had hassle with it quite a lot recently. However, there is a company in Scotland, Northern Tool and Gear, that appear to make very good crown wheel and pinions, and they've actually made some for Jaguar rear ends. They've not done many yet, but they have made some, and we've got hold of an NTG 3.07 to 1 ratio crown wheel and pinion, and then a gripper differential for this. It's having a 4HU fitment gripper differential, which very local business just down the road in Coventry, and we've used them a lot, and we really rate them. Very well made, very serviceable, great support. Can't fault them. So we now have those bits, so that at some point a little bit further down the line we can actually build that diff up, but for the moment, with the side shafts in like that, that'll be fine for mock-up, and it saves a bit of weight not having all the components in there. So yeah, moving on, Mustang, last but not least. Gaz has been very busy again on this. He's been doing a few little home improvements around the mixing room in the booth as well, but he's been spending quite a lot of time on this. The front end, it had been crash damaged, it had been accident damaged earlier in its life, and the lamp surrounds and various parts of the front end were not in very good condition, were quite damaged. So replacements have been bought, and it's, as is usually the way, now a case of making them fit. They were fairly far from fitting. They're a lot closer to fitting now, but there is still more work needed. And it's not just when people talk about fitting panels and some work needed, just to give you a bit of background on that. Obviously a lot of people watching this will probably be aware of what I'm talking about, but a lot of people will probably think, oh, by that do you mean the order you tighten up some screws, or you need to slot a hole out? No, unfortunately, by a lot of work we're referring to actually welding extension onto panel edges, shortening panel edges, actually cutting and altering the shape of panels to make them fit. I think from what Gaz has told me on this, we're looking in a few places at welding, building up the edges of panels to close up gaps, basically to lengthen them in areas. To make all the parts fit, you generally get quite quickly into welding, cutting and welding panels. It's not a case of elongating a hole or slotting a hole or just a little bit of a tap on a corner or something. It's generally more dramatic work than that, unfortunately. It's fairly standard. You know, a lot of the German car, a lot of the VW stuff is brilliant. That's brilliant. You buy a panel that's genuine and it pretty much just fits. The Germans were very good at that. The British and Americans less so, unfortunately. And this is a case in point there, where there's a lot of work to get all this front end all to line up, all to be symmetrical, all to be level, all the lines following the correct lines. And all the shut lines acceptable. So yeah, Gaz is just slogging his way through that at the moment. There's a little way to go on that. We're also still waiting. We need door catches to completely finalise the door fits. So that's kind of on hold, awaiting the door catches still at the moment. But all the front was forward of that was still work we could get on with. So yeah, he's carrying on with that at the moment. But he's getting there. There's still a way to go, but he's getting there. And then just finally, sort of on my left, I touched on it while we were through next door, and they've been mentioned before, but just finally to round off, the trims for Utah are sat there. They're pretty much ready, I think, now to go for hydro dipping. I think they just need to be painted black, and then they'll be ready to go for hydro dipping. But there's no point rushing that last stage, because we've got, as I've mentioned in there's a variety of other parts that have got to go with those for hydro dipping, which aren't ready yet. I mean, aren't even completely drawn yet. So we've got to finalise the last few bits to go. And I think at that point, that pretty much rounds the week up. It's been a busy one with a lot of things going on in various places. So well, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and yeah, we shall see you all again next week.